Welcome to the Doing Business in Bentonville podcast. I am your co-host, Josh Saffran, based here in Bentonville. This podcast is the Whiskered Warehouse Warrior Supply Chain, or all the W's, and we are focused on supply chain innovation. I lead the office here for Plug and Play, and what we do is we accelerate startup technology and work with corporate partners like yourself to deliver solutions by introducing startup technology into your world. And my co-host, the man, the myth, and the legend, the man with a better beard than I have, is Harvey Williams. He is running our investment and ventures-based team out of Austin. Harvey, say hello to the group.
Hey, everyone. We are really excited to bring you guys cool founders and cool startups that are changing the dynamic for the work inside of the supply chain. So whether it's a hardware company or a software company, whether they are 12 months old or 12 years old doing this, we want to bring in and focus and highlight all the good work that entrepreneurs are doing in this space to make everybody's job more productive, easier, and safer. So thanks for listening, and we're excited to bring you guys this series.
Welcome to the Doing Business in Bentonville podcast. Today, I am your host, Josh Saffran, and this is the Whiskered Warehouse Warrior Supply Chain, where we're focused on innovation in the supply chain. And we bring in the coolest guests to you talking in this space. I am Josh. I lead the Plug and Play office here in Northwest Arkansas. And I got my co-host with a fine-looking beard, Harvey Williams. Harvey, say a quick hello to the fans.
So we're going with the Whiskered Warehouse Warriors, huh?
Well, unless
I love this.
Give us a better name. I mean, we are Whiskered. We are talking about warehouse, and I know you're a warrior.
And Jeff is building warriors, rather. Yeah. Oh, this is going to be beautiful.
Is it nice?
Oh, I'm so excited.
And our first guest we're ever going to have is Jeff Cardenas, who is the CEO and founder of a super cool company called Apptronik. Jeff, welcome.
Thanks for having me here.
You are always welcome here. And I love the photos you have in the background. Those are your weekend warriors, correct?
That's correct. That's Apollo.
Well, Alana, do you want to kick us off with an icebreaker?
I do. I also want to mention that I am not a whiskered warehouse warrior. That needed to be known. Okay, so we're going to play a little icebreaker of Mad Libs using some recent supply chain headlines. So I'm going to ask you guys for a noun.
Harvey, go.
Ship.
Ship. Okay, another noun.
Table.
Color. Jeff.
Green.
A type of transportation. Harvey.
Motorcycle.
Oh, I didn't see that coming.
And maybe
I'm trying to mess this up somehow.
Maybe a group think. I need a ship name.
Evergreen.
Okay.
Oh, I like Titanic. Let's go with Titanic.
Let's go Titanic. Good one.
All right. So our headline is the world's first ship-to-table green methanol bunkering for motorcycle Titanic. Successful.
Thank you, Gen AI.
Mm-hmm.
Very well done.
All right. So we have one more. Proper noun, Jeff.
Blanket.
Blanket.
Lincoln.
Lincoln, like Abraham.
Lincoln.
That makes more sense. A noun. Josh.
Cup.
Verb in the past tense.
Sprinted.
And a
Guys,
job.
I don't know if you know this, but I read. So
We have our Plug and Play group.
vocabulary.
Jeff, I need a job title, not CEO.
Head of operations.
All right, you guys came up with Lincoln is back with a new cup of and open AI researchers sprinted of AI breakthrough ahead of head of operations ouster.
Wow.
That was a mouthful.
Yeah. I didn't
I'm
see
confused.
Yeah.
I didn't see that coming. But Elena, an awesome start to our podcast. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And work on the whiskers, huh? You got to be part of the team.
I don't think I want to work on that.
Or get a cat. Get a cat. How many cats do you have?
Oh.
Isn't he?
I have 0 cats. I have 2 dogs, though.
Maybe like
Whisker.
bring in some kind of stuffed animal or something to be part of the Whiskered Warriors.
Okay, next time
Next time, be more.
We need a mascot.
All right.
I
Better
love it.
prepared next time.
Jeff, do you go by
Need a
Jeff or
mascot.
Jeffrey? How do we want to introduce you?
I go by Jeff unless I'm in trouble by my wife or parents.
Harvey, when you're in trouble, do we just throw a middle name in? Because Harvey is
Usually abbreviated. It's Harv.
uh-huh.
Yeah. And my daughter has started to pick up on that, where she's calling me by my first name. And that's not fun.
But you know how you would not be in trouble? If Jeff was able to get you Apollo as a permanent gift for Valentine's Day for the house. I mean, just think about Apollo doing laundry, making dinners, feeding the babies. Let's start to talk a little bit about Apollo. Jeff, give us a background on Apptronik and this funny, cool guy named Apollo.
Yeah, I guess where do I start? So Apollo is really born out of many years of research and development. We started the company in 2016. It came out of the human-centered robotics lab at the University of Texas at Austin, working on a robot for NASA Johnson Space Center that was called Valkyrie. So Valkyrie was a humanoid robot that was built for something called the DARPA Robotics Challenge, 2013 to 2015. And then there was a couple researchers, Dr. Luis Sintis and Dr. Nick Payne, Luis and Nick, that were working on Valkyrie as part of this lab at University of Texas at Austin. So I met Luis and Nick when I was finishing up grad school and had these ambitions of building a great company here in Texas and really sort of pushing the next frontier. So sort of my background and my lens was, for a long time, I'd felt like I'd been born in the wrong generation. I had been really inspired by Apple and Steve Jobs and what he'd done for the world, and sort of daydreamed of what that would have been like to be alive back in the 70s and seeing the personal computer and sort of ridden that all the way up, all the changes that it made to society as a whole. And that's sort of what I was looking for when I was in grad school, is what's that next major transformative technology that's going to really impact the way that we live and work. And when I met Luis and Nick and I saw Valkyrie, I thought, that's it. That's the next big thing. And so we were starting with a, $5 million plus NASA shiny, robot. And the goal was to get to a commercial industrial humanoid robot that we could build for under $50,000. And so we've done a tremendous amount of work. Apollo's our 8th iteration of humanoid robot. We've built almost 14 unique robots since we got started. We went from humanoid robots. Everyone told us that humanoids were too far out, and we had to, focus on something more near term. So we did Iron Man suits for a few years for U.S. Special Forces, and all sort of getting towards the robot that we always wanted to build and getting the technology really ready to go from the lab out into the real world. And so what you see behind me here is the result of that journey. And so Apollo is an industrial humanoid robot. You can kind of think of it like a personal computer where, it's a software update away from doing a new task or new functionality. And this is really the beginning in our view of the next big wave of automation. So happy to dive in, but that's kind of the quick intro. And yeah, happy to dive in wherever you guys want to go from there.
And Jeff, maybe we can start with the lab, because I was able to visit a few months ago and it was awesome. But maybe paint a picture for folks that are listening. What do you have here in Austin that people might be able to see if they're visiting, if they're traveling? Maybe a few people are going to be coming through for South by. What are you guys working on?
Yeah, I mean, if you come to our lab, I like to think maybe the early days of what Tony Stark had or something. We're in about 36,000 square feet here in Austin. We're building these robots from the ground up. We build everything from the actuators to the electronics to the structures. We have a range of systems that we're testing and bringing online. We have the early versions of Apollo, and now we're building the next generation of Apollo that's going to be going out into the field. We have a very large kind of engineering floor that's multidisciplinary. So we have software, hardware, systems, and then all the subdomains that are involved in each of those, all here under one roof. And we also have a customer center. So we have about an 8,000 square foot customer center that's essentially like a mock warehouse or manufacturing floor, where we're actually testing the robots in a live environment that's as representative as we can be for the actual environments that we're ultimately going to deploy Apollo into long term. So yeah, it's quite the place to see. It's taken many years for us to get here, but yeah.
Jeff, so let me ask you a question. So I would assume Apollo works in DC's warehouses, and he is doing tasks like lifting boxes and things like that. So if I'm a CPG, I'm a supplier, I'm a retailer, walk me through some of the good use cases and some of the work that Apollo can do to make life easier for some of these folks.
Yeah, so the best analogy to think about what's happening in robotics is to think about the personal computer. So the easiest way to sort of explain this is, in the early days of computing, you had special purpose computers. Computers became more generalized, sort of mainframe computers, but they were very infrastructure heavy. And then the sort of breakout moment for computing was this transition from mainframes into the personal computer. Personal computer was this modular general purpose platform. And the question was, what's the computer for? And the idea was, it's a software update away from doing anything. And the compute had to get better and better over time. But you can sort of follow that same analogy into robotics, where I think of industrial robots today, think of those as mainframe computers. You can do a range of different tasks with an industrial robot, but they're very infrastructure heavy, very bulky, pretty rigid. And the humanoid robot, in my view, represents this transition to more general purpose, versatile hardware. So similar to the computer, in the early days, computers were relatively limited in their functionality. It's like you can do your taxes, word processing. And that's essentially where we're at with sort of this domain of robotics. The sky's the limit in terms of where we can go long term, but early on, we're going to start with simple tasks. And so we're going to transition from what I call gross manipulation into more dexterity over time. So the first applications that we're doing with Apollo are material handling. We're basically moving boxes. We can move boxes of any shape or size, and moving totes, so cube-shaped objects roughly, and we can move them from one place to another. But the idea is that as we sort of build the data sets and advance on the AI fronts, then there's tremendous opportunities for this form factor where it becomes a software update away from taking on any new task over time. So we'll start with these simple tasks, and then you'll see us start to be able to tackle increasingly complex tasks over time. And sort of the big idea here is that this is a robot that can retrofit into any existing environment, and it's multi-purpose in that it can do different tasks throughout a 24-hour period. So we're going to start with these limited tasks, but then the idea is you have a robot that doesn't take very much infrastructure to install, and then it can do something in the morning, change the activity by lunch, and then even by evening, you can do something different, sort of flexing throughout your workflow through your supply chain initially over time.
And mobility is important with the legs, but I think you guys are also doing floor-mounted installs, right? Where the torso is mounted maybe to a pedestal, maybe for kitting and kind of conveyor work. Is that right?
Yeah, so the simple idea here is about versatility. So today you've got thousands of robots, and each of these robots does one thing. And what the future looks like is one robot that can do thousands of different things. And so, this is very much a story about AI and autonomy, but it's also about form factor for versatility. So if you take my analogy of the personal computer, the question becomes, what is the most versatile form factor? And for us, the answer seemed obvious. This was not a popular opinion when we got started. It's now become more and more, I think, consensus in the industry. But the idea is, hey, the world is built for humans. These workflows are largely designed around the human form factor. Humans are very sort of space efficient. So we take up a very small footprint, but we have a very large workspace. We use 2 arms. We can reach high. And so what you want to build then is basically the most versatile platform you can build. And there's these big debates, do you actually need legs if you're going to go with the humanoid form factor? Why not put it on wheels? Do you need any mobility at all? And to me, there's where the beauty of robotics sort of comes in that if you are smart about the way you build a platform like this, then you can build modularity into the system, and you can actually have all of those things in one form factor. So through all the iterations that we've done and all the work we've done in the humanoid space, what we realized is that depending on the use case, that you might want different forms of mobility, or maybe you don't need mobility at all. And so the way that Apollo is designed is with a modular upper body. So all the battery and compute is actually in the upper torso. And in order to get to a humanoid form factor, to get to the bipedal form, which we think is the most versatile form overall, you have to design the system for 2 legs. So humans take up, less than a square foot in terms of our footprint. But if we want to lift something heavy, we can widen our stance. If we want to reach the ground, we can bend our knees. So it's very versatile. It's not just about stepping over things and getting upstairs. And so if you want to be able to sort of move into that space, you have to design the system for bipedal locomotion. You have to get the mass distribution correct. And then you can always simplify the problem by, as you mentioned, put it on a pedestal, put it on wheels, you could put it on tracks, and you could put it on any sort of mobility base that you want down the road. The inverse, though, is not true. So if you build a system for legs, or for wheels, you can't just go put it on legs. Like, you have to resolve a whole number of problems, both on the hardware and software side. And so, this is where we think the path towards wide-scale adoption is modularity. The same principles apply to the end effectors as well. So we think ultimately some version of hands is going to win the day. But for many of these applications, if you're moving boxes around, I wish I had suction grippers on my hands, right? You can use those types of principles apply to the end effectors as well.
So Jeff, Harvey, like myself, is a procrastinator, and when it comes to Valentine's Day, I'm sure neither of us have gotten gifts yet for our amazing wives. This is not for sale for Harvey or myself to buy, but if a corporation wanted to buy a handful of these things, a small army, can you start to share a little bit around costing and what some of that stuff looks like? Anything you can provide to a company that may be interested in procuring some of these?
Yeah, so these robots are not available for consumer yet. The applications that they can do are relatively limited compared to what they'll do in the future. And if you look at something like the home, this is the most complicated, environment that there is. Some people's homes are messier than others, but everyone's home is different. Things are laid out in, different places. And so there's a lot of technology development, in our view, that still has to happen for us to get towards the home robot, but this is where we're headed. And so what we're really focused on is the commercial markets, where there's enough repeatability that you can get a robot doing something, continuously over a 24-hour period. And we'll get more and more what we call unstructured over time.
But if I'm the head of CPG, supply chain, fill in the blank, and I wanted to have a bunch of these in a DC, how would I go about procuring these, and at what types of costs are we looking at?
Yeah, so one of the exciting things about where we're at now in this space is that we can now produce these robots at much more affordably than we could in the past. So it depends on how you want to buy the robots, but we have 2 sort of business models. Either robots as a service, where you're effectively leasing the robots, or we have a CapEx model where you can actually buy the fleets outright. Under the RAS model, we can offer immediate savings compared to what your labor spend is today. So in some cases, we can offer a 20% discount to what existing labor is. Long term, we think we can offer up to 50% discount to existing labor over time. So the economics are really compelling. On a CapEx model, we want to be, our ambition is to have a 1-year sort of payback period. Right now, we're a little less than 2 years. But this is something that will improve and get better over time. So we haven't released sort of immediate pricing. And in all honesty, this is something that we're still working through. But one of the major opportunities here is that if you can build a much more capable, versatile system, and you can do that more affordably than what we've been able to do in traditional robots, that really changes the game for how we, the business models and how we consume this type of automation long term. And so I talked about all the iteration that we've done over time. That's really where a lot of the iteration came from, was how do we build a very capable system like this? But the goal for us is to actually build a full humanoid robot for less than the price of many industrial robotic arms that are out there on the market today. And that's taken the better part of a decade for us to get to. And our view was, if you can do that, then that really changes everything. And we're now at that sort of initial entry point where we can do that.
And Jeff, on the business model piece, what's your take right now, right? Because like the traditional, I guess, thought is enterprise would want to go CapEx, SMEs will want to go RAS, but the robotics space, I think, has been working on RAS now for maybe a decade, maybe a little less. And it's shifted, I think, the idea behind how to pay for this and how does the business case pencil. So I'm curious, where do you think the market is right now on business model, not necessarily pricing?
I think it's fairly industry dependent. So if you look at, in logistics, if you look at 3PLs, the robots as a service model is obviously very attractive. They don't want a lot of CapEx spend largely. There's some large 3PLs out there that do make big capital investments. But so if you look in logistics, RAS has really dominated in terms of what our customers are looking for. If you look at manufacturing, it's the inverse. Manufacturing, they're very comfortable with the CapEx model. I think in the early days of this space, a lot of people are really trying to determine, how real the technology is and when it's going to be ready. So I think that we've reached the point now where there's a lot of consensus that this is the future. The question is, when is it, when is that? Is that next year? Is that 2 years from now? Or is that going to take longer until this is really ready for prime time? And so what we're seeing is, in the early days, a lot of interest in the RAS model, where folks want to try out the robots and really sort of understand how it works, integrate at a smaller scale, and then sort of make decisions over the long run. I think, though, that robots as a service is here to stay. And I think that it's really compelling to get beyond sort of the larger companies and into a lot of the small to medium businesses that traditionally haven't been able to afford major capital expenditures, that do have major labor challenges. That's doesn't matter who you talk to across the board. Everyone has a hard time of finding consistent, reliable labor. And so these new RAS models really offer the opportunity for folks to sort of get into this space and test it out and start to, solve some of these problems.
So, Jeff, I am the head of supply chain for CPG 123XYZ, and you've convinced me I want a whole fleet of Apollo. And I walk into the head of my HR, and she says the following to me. 1, what about the safety of my workers with Apollo being there? How do I guarantee their safety? And 2, is this going to eliminate jobs for people? And my response back as the head of supply chain that wants to buy a fleet of these from you is what?
So we came from, one of the things that I talked about in the front end of this is we came from the human-centered robotics lab at the University of Texas. So we've been thinking a lot about human-robot interaction and sort of this future for a very long time. In terms of safety, one of the things that we're world leaders in is something called force control. So this is sort of a new paradigm in robotics where you offer the sense of touch to these robots. Traditionally, robots were position controlled, where they were just moving to waypoints, and now we've added this sense of touch. You saw the introduction of that with cobots. So that started in 2004. So in terms of safety, Apollo is very safe on a relative basis compared to traditional industrial robots. You could think of Apollo as a giant collaborative robot. There's several layers to that safety. So there's vision systems all throughout Apollo. So it can slow down or have different safety behaviors as someone is getting close to the robot. And then it also has a very high fidelity sense of touch, such that it can control its force when it's interacting with something that's unexpected, making it safe to be around. So safety is really the name of the game. If you compare robots like Apollo to other systems, there's also inherent properties in the technology that makes it more safe. So the actual forces that a robot like Apollo is applying to the world because of the inertia of the robot is actually much lower compared to these big kind of hulking industrial robots, of the past. So from a technology standpoint and from a product standpoint, we're entering a space where these robots are much safer than their predecessors. Now, there's new things about humanoids that we have to sort of figure out as an industry because it's walking around. And so these kind of robots can fall over. So we're working on standards and other things in terms of what does safety actually mean on a humanoid robot? And I would sort of fully acknowledge that we're at the beginning of that. But safety is really important here overall. In terms of the job question, I think if you actually go to many of these companies, what you'll find is they just don't have the people to do the jobs they've already got today.
Yep.
So, I think that's sort of the big question here is the question that, we need automation just to continue business as operating today, let alone growing into the future. Everyone's experiencing the same types of labor shortages. And the question is just, what's the form factor? So Apollo is no different than any other robot. It just happens to have a form factor that, roughly resembles a human. And I actually think that if you look long-term about sort of worker satisfaction and human-robot interaction for how, the types of robots that people are going to want to interact with, I actually think that humanoid robots are a far more optimistic version of the future than, these lifeless kind of hunks of metal that we've traditionally sort of employed. Like for me, this idea of working with and being around these beautiful machines that are built in our image, that we know how to communicate with, that do work in the same ways that we do work, is far more optimistic than just being, a cog in a broader machine where there's a bunch of, sort of lifeless machines that I'm just sort of feeding as we do today. So I think that these are, important conversations and topics, but I think that automation is going to be really important to the future. We don't have the people. If you look at the demographic trends that are, that we're facing, it's not going to get better. I think it's actually going to get worse. And so it's really just going to be a debate about how we do that and sort of where we apply it. But this is the way of the future.
Yeah, I was at a supply chain seminar at some point. There was a couple hundred people, and somebody on a panel was on stage and said, raise their hands, show of hands, who in this room went to school saying they want to unload boxes from a trailer? That wasn't a person that put their hands up, because that's not what people went to school for, what they want to do. So I think you're spot on there. Harvey, anything?
And in terms of industry, where people are going to start seeing this first, right? It kind of feels like it might be automotive, because you've got the Tesla bot, Jeff, and I think you're quite familiar with that group and Elon, both being in Austin. And then you've got, I think, Figure and BMW partnering up, right? You've got a couple of others, Ford and Agility. So do you agree? Do you think automotive is the industry that's pushing this forward because they're more familiar with industrial robotics as an industry and a culture? Or do you have a different opinion?
I think you're going to see a lot in the news and media about automotive, and I think automotive will be, a major sort of early adopter. I mean, we've actually worked in automotive over the course of many years on projects like this, and so sort of very familiar with the use cases. What I'll say is that many of the automotive use cases that haven't been automated today are very difficult, at least compared to logistics use cases. So I actually think that where you'll probably see the highest uptake of these types of robots is going to be in logistics and in the supply chain. And if you actually look at automotive, where you'll see the earliest sort of, big use cases and deployments will probably be in those types of tasks, in the supply chain task, actually, because those are maybe the easiest tasks to sort of start with. That's the lowest hanging fruit. Dexterous manipulation, where you require fine dexterity and you have to orient parts, these are still pretty challenging things to do on a mobile robot and to do at the speeds that are required for this type of work to be economic. But there is a huge amount of demand. And if you look at the margins from automotive as a whole, there's existential reasons why they need to really focus on this long term. But I actually think where you'll see the most uptake over the next 5 years is probably going to be in logistics and throughout the supply chain. And I mean, I'm sure as you guys know, the supply chain underpins the entire economy. And so our view is that's where you start, and that starts to provide an entry point across many industries. So you can think about, our view is you sort of start in the warehouse. We'll also be looking at manufacturing as well, but really focused on the warehouse. And then you can sort of move down into manufacturing or up into retail. And I think across those sectors, manufacturing into warehouse into retail, is where you're going to see sort of the largest uptake of these types of robots over, let's say, the next 5 years. Construction, energy, security, these are other areas where you'll start to see uptake, but in much lower volumes than I think you'll see in logistics and supply chain.
Super cool. Jeff, I have one last question / comment / story, I guess I'm looking for from you. I had a chance to see Apollo in person, and it's pretty badass. Can I say that, Elena? Badass? I guess I can.
I accept.
It's pretty badass. You had some interesting visitors. When we get to talk to some of these founders, as Harvey knows better than me, the stories are amazing. And you had a very impressive tech individual come down to Austin and tour your facility. I'd love to hear a little bit more about who that was, if you can share what that experience was like for you personally.
Yeah, we've been really fortunate kind of being in this space. We've actually had a number of, people that I really look up to and respect visit us over the years. Most of them we can't talk about, but one that we can talk about that was made public was having Bill Gates come and visit us. So I use the analogy of the personal computer as sort of an inspiration for what got us into this, and had the chance to try that out on Bill. Hey, what do you think about this analogy? He's like, no, I think you're right. I think that humanoids do represent one of the embodiments that really does mirror the personal computer. And it was great to meet him. He was very generous with his time, very thoughtful. One kind of interesting fact about it was he actually took notes while we met with him. So he had a legal pad, and he really just absorbed and was digesting a lot of the content, was taking notes. And I was really impressed by that for someone of his caliber to really be thinking through and learning about a subject so intensely. So, it was really an honor to have him here, and it's exciting to see him and other folks really put their voice behind this, because I think this is going to be an important part of the future.
I think that's so cool when you were home with the family or out with the friends, be like, hey, pass the salt. Guess who came in and visited us today? And took notes. I mean, that's a pretty cool story.
Yeah. It's interesting to be in a space where, I've joked, when you start a company, a lot of the advice you get is varied. It's very different. And maybe the only consistent advice we got when we started this company was not to do humanoids. Everyone was like, hey, this is going to take you 50 years. They're always going to be too complicated. They're always going to be too expensive. And our view was like, well, what if that's not true? What if they're not always too complicated and they're not always too expensive? And so we just really put our heads down over the last better part of a decade, really trying to change those assumptions and prove that we can build these types of machines and we can make them useful. We can sort of marry affordability with elegance and produce things that are beautiful and exciting to be around, and make the future an exciting, something to look forward to.
Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate your time. This was fantastic. Harvey, I'm going to ask you as a principal and lead investor in the space for Plug and Play, any, I can't say words of wisdom. You told me I can't say Williams' words of wisdom, so I won't go down that path. But
Too much.
Anything
Too on the nose
that you want to be able to share with the viewers around the humanoid space and how Plug and Play and you are viewing it from a landscape perspective?
Yeah, Williams' words of wisdom. We're going to keep workshopping that one. I don't think that one's going to stick. But we're big fans of Jeff and what Jeff is building. I think the coolest part about this space, from our perspective, is Jeff is building this business in Texas. I think it's Jeff and maybe Eric Nevis at Plus One down in San Antonio, at least in our world, on the supply chain side for robotics, that are probably at the forefront of this space in kind of Central America, which I think is unique. Most other companies that are trying to do this are either on the East Coast or on the West Coast, right? Access to capital, access to talent, good universities. But I think what Jeff is proving is that is also true here, which is something I think that is very, very cool. And there is a certain pride, I think, that comes with that and wanting to work with companies from the heartland or from Middle America or from the South and from Texas. And that really does stand out. So for the listeners, if you want to start thinking about how to engage here in the robotic space, I'd probably say from our just pulse on the market, the US is probably right now out there in front, but there is a lot of activity happening in Japan and China, of course, in the humanoid space. I'm curious to see if Jeff has made some friends in other countries that are working on this. But I definitely think if you want to get started here, chat with Jeff first, because what they're building is definitely at the forefront of what the humanoid will probably look like in the warehouse. Right now, it's moving towards some boxes. Before too long, we're going to be unloading trailers, perhaps loading trailers as well. And then who knows, right? Last mile delivery is probably on the table in the near future as we see it. So it's a great space at the moment. We've seen a lot of activity happening in the AMR space early on, probably in the beginning of the 2011 and 12 area. An arena, and then started to pick up with dexterity, Plus One and right hand. And then now it seems we're in this third wave of commercialization for the robotic space, which is the humanoid, which is a beautiful marriage, I think, of those two technologies, plus obviously a lot more under the hood. And it's a very hard problem to solve. So for the investors that are listening, contact Jeff. He's always willing to take an investor's call, I believe. And then for any prospective customers that are listening, Jeff, where can people find you?
You can find us on apptronik.com, APPTRONIK, or you can send me an email as well. I don't know that I want to put it out on a broader podcast, but reach out to Harvey and he can connect you to me.
Reach out to me. Yep. That is Harvey at pnptc.com. We're going to flash that, I'm sure, on the video. Would love to take any inbounds, and I will. Oh, Jeff, I'll be your filter. That's fine. I'm happy to do that.
That's what we do.
Where are you going to be traveling, Jeff? Are you going to be at conferences? Where can people see this robot if they're out and about this year?
Yeah, so we'll be at South by Southwest this year, right here in Austin, Texas. We'll have Apollos out there at several different events. We're giving a few big talks at South by, and then we'll be at several other conferences to be announced here very soon. You can follow us on social. We're making some big announcements here in the coming weeks and months about places where you can see Apollo here, throughout the year.
Thank you, Jeff.
Cool.
We're excited about where you've been, where you're going, and we're happy to be a part of the journey with you. Thank you for being a guest on Doing Business in Bentonville, and best of luck and continued success with Apollo and all the next generations coming behind it.
Thank you guys for having me.
Thank you.